So this afternoon, our first speaker is Dion Myberg. Now, Dion is one of those guys that if you meet him, you will say, man, what an amazing person that I've met this afternoon, who comes with a lot of energy and a lot of vitality. He's the ICT Infrastructure and Operations Manager for Mediclinic. And Dion, his claim to fame is that he has been part of Partners for Possibilities for more than 2 years, 3 years now, and was involved as a business leader. And this afternoon, he comes with 19 and a half years of experience in this field. And this afternoon, we want to say to you, Dion, it's a privilege to have you in the room, and we're going to hand over immediately to you, and you can share your screen and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jay, and thank you very much for that flattering introduction. I just want to say it's a real privilege to be here this afternoon, and I was actually hoping my co-host Jay would be going first, and I would follow suit, but no worries at all. I'm happy to start. So thank you very much, and I think this is such an exciting and pertinent topic. And I think, Selwyn, you mentioned COVID-19 has catapulted the world into a new era. We have heard so much about the fourth industrial revolution around the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. It is just clear, and as you mentioned, some kicking and screaming and some willingly, we've had no option from business and education but to move and to adapt into what is becoming a new norm. And with it comes a lot of challenges, and as well as a lot of exciting new possibilities. When we look at education, it is key to understand that, and you mentioned it, Selwyn, our children are growing up in a digital world. They are growing up with cell phones in their hands. They are actually teaching adults these days about technology. What is really important is that the digitization of the world, and business as well as education are faced with the exact same challenge. How are we going to rise to this challenge in digitalizing our world, going into this new digital age? But it's good and well to talk about e-learning, the digital world, and teaching in this world. But before we get into the wonderful possibilities, as well as how this can be done, I think it's very important, and from my perspective, and due to my experience also with schools and the journey with Partners for Possibility, is we also have to be realistic. And we need to understand, for us to get there, we need to understand where we are. And e-learning and access to this digital world is wonderful and opens new opportunities. However, access to the digital world, access to technology is what we first of all and foremost need before we can even think of embarking on this journey. So what I would like to do this afternoon is to talk about laying the foundation. How do we lay the foundation when it comes to this new world of the digital world? So this afternoon, I would like to just cover the following points. First of all, let's look at the stark reality. Access to technology, access to data. Where do we find ourselves? Where are many of our students? Where are our learners? Secondly, I would like to cover the point of what have we found? And here very much, I felt that today I would like to speak from a very practical perspective. The work that I've been very fortunate to be involved with Jessica Batts, the leadership facilitator from PFP in the Winelands and Overberg region. We have done a lot of work and investigation, and I thought it would be nice, and from a practical perspective, to share these findings with this forum this afternoon. The third point is, what did we actually do in the Winelands region? How did we follow on from this problem statement around what we found, and what did we actually do? And then point 4, to just show a very practical needs analysis, which was done by Jessica, specifically in the Winelands and Overberg region, to give you a practical example of how this needs analysis can be done. And then lastly, what can we do? What can we as individuals, what can we as principals, as business leaders, and as Partners for Possibility, what can we do? And these are practical aspects. I find often people, and I've been to many forums where the Department of Education speaks about their strategy, and they speak about the e-learning, and they speak about their accomplishments. But often we fail to actually stop and look at what is the reality, what is the stark reality that we find out in the world. And when we look at the stark reality, I think we have to take cognizance of the fact that many of our schools are government public schools that are no-fee schools. These are rated no fees. In other words, they do not get the funding that many other schools get. We have to acknowledge that the majority of our learners come from very poor families, families where unemployment is around 80%. The majority of these are single parents that rely on social grants. Families and households that are made up of more than 4 family members, sometimes even more than that, with relatives all living under the same roof. These are the realities that we have to realize exist. We have a large number of schools which are rural or farming schools, and these schools actually rely on seasonal workers for income. Work only comes around in specific seasons. Many of these families don't have the luxury or the financial capacity or access to technology. These are families that don't have laptops, printers, tablets, smartphones. And that is something that we need to take into consideration, and we need to think about when we talk about this new digital world and gaining access to it. What we're seeing today is that currently parents are now stepping up. As we know, with this COVID lockdown, students having to learn from home, parents have become involved. They have stepped up to facilitate the learning on behalf of the educator. Yet it's very important to realize that we need to ensure that that the educators, the parents, and the students work together in this reality. I think it's a fact that it's not going to work if we leave out either of these parties. We have to also acknowledge that our educators themselves don't have access to equipment and technology such as laptops. And here I want to use a very practical example. The school that I was privileged to be partnered with at the end of 2018 and during the course of 19 was Clutersville High School in Stellenbosch. And in the course of 2019, managed to arrange laptops for all the teachers at the school. And I think it was at that point that we came to the realization that many of these teachers had never had access to technology. They weren't astute themselves on how to use technology. But to me, what was so encouraging was to see that over a short period of time, these educators and these teachers started realizing the benefit and started using the technology in teaching the students. So we mustn't also take it for granted or assume that our teachers and our educators have access to this type of technology. The department, as we know, and other sources, there are many sources out there that have made learning material available. And that is a wonderful initiative. If we look at initiatives that have taken place on the part of the Vodacoms, the MTNs, the department themselves, they are providing access. But unfortunately, many of our most vulnerable students and our most vulnerable communities, the poorest communities, are often excluded from this. And they're excluded from this because they do not have access to technology and connectivity. On top of this, we need to realize that these are the very same people we're talking about that don't have access to food. The same grant that they receive, has to put food on the table. And in many instances, these are extended families. Schools, as we know, have feeding schemes where they currently are feeding learners and parents twice a week, often on a Wednesday and a Friday, or a Tuesday and a Thursday. And it's also important to note that 179 or more educators are actually school governing body positions. And these positions, as we know, are also at risk because many of these school governing body posts are actually funded through fundraising. And these salaries have to be paid through fundraising. And during this time, many of these jobs are actually at risk. So when we look at the stark reality and we take cognizance of where many of our poor communities and our poor learners come from, we last year and the previous year, in conjunction with Partners for Possibility, actually did an investigation in the Winelands area to have a look at what were the issues. Now, this was pre-COVID-19 when we were still looking at e-learning and schools' connectivity and how schools have adopted the e-learning philosophy and gearing their students up for preparing for this new world of technology. And what we discovered during our investigation is we found that there were many, many IT-related problems. These problems were related to connectivity, schools not having access to internet connectivity. It was relating to equipment, problems with equipment within the school. And I think another important area we discovered is that there was a very big disconnect between the department and the schools. What we found is that the department didn't have the dedicated, reliable support structures at department level to support the schools. And here again, I want to just give a practical example. In all the schools in the Winelands and Overberg region, there is one single IT support person for all those schools. And what we found is that schools would log IT issues or problems with the department, and it would essentially take weeks before somebody was able to come out or attend to the problem. We also discovered after a number of meetings, and this was a very interesting revelation, is that there are 240 schools across the country that have no connectivity. That means there is no connection, internet connection whatsoever. Of those, we found 85 were in the Winelands region, which we were particularly focusing on. Now, what I found quite astounding is, I'm not sure if everyone is aware that part of every telco or ISP provider, cellular provider in the country, part of their operating license says that they need to provide broadband connectivity for all schools within Southern Africa, and that is part and parcel of their license to operate as a telco or an internet service provider within South Africa. What we discovered in the Western Cape, for example, is that the strategy was very different in that they opted to lay fiber to all the schools, which is very audacious and it's great. However, this excluded many of the farm schools. So where you have schools, which I have visited along with Jessica, in farm districts, farming areas where there is no connectivity, the closest possible connectivity is a Vodacom or an MTN tower. But this is the reality. The schools don't even have this connectivity. The other big problem that we found is that in many instances, there were very generous donations made by corporates, by individuals, by companies to underprivileged schools. But what we found is that when this equipment was donated or these services offered, we hit a brick wall because the department also has certain protocols and security measures in place. So to give you another practical example, servers, PCs, and equipment that is donated, even connectivity is not allowed onto the school's network. software licensing, etc., for educators as well as for students was not being allowed because of security protocols within the department. There was also an example of where an organization like Remgro in the Stellenbosch area had sponsored broadband internet links for many of the schools. However, these were white elephants because they were not allowed to be connected to the school network. So essentially what this meant is that much of this connectivity and this equipment, which was provided in good faith and came from a good place, was not being utilized. And we found these different service providers were not actually speaking to each other. So what was really interesting for us is at the end of 2019, I actually managed to have a meeting with Clinton Walker, who is the head of the e-learning strategy of the Department of the Western Cape Education Department. And what was really quite astounding was the wonderful reception that I received when engaging with the Western Cape Education Department, the openness to actually want help from the private sector. And the relationship that we found developed was that there is an opportunity out there for business to get involved with the Department of Education. We also found in many instances that it wasn't just about equipment, it wasn't just about donations, it was also about companies, organizations, and individuals that were really quite willing to offer resources, to offer help, and to offer time to try and assist the schools and the department with technology needs. And one of my fellow speaker, Jay Mayer, is one of those people who's going to share with you the types of initiatives that are available out there. But I think it's important that we need to understand that the relationship between teachers, between parents, and between the learners is critical in making this work. So what did we actually do? After establishing what these concerns were, where the system was broken, what did we do? So one of the things we did is we first of all established a committee which consisted of myself and one of my colleagues at Mediclinic in conjunction with Partners for Possibility, with Jessica and her team. And we then identified the right person, as I mentioned to you, Mr. Clinton Walker at the department. We engaged with the department. And I think it's clear to maybe share with you the challenges that the department also faces is very real. And where I felt a kindred spirit is that coming from an IT environment where I'm involved with also providing a service and support to many hospitals, patients, and doctors, I could empathize with the challenges that the department is also faced with. However, what I appreciated was the department's openness and willingness to engage with business. And let's be honest, previous engagements that business and Department of Education has not been successful. And this has been particularly for one reason. Business wants to come in and tell the Western Cape or the Department of Education how to run things, instead of saying, where are your problems, where can we help? So what I found was the approach in offering that assistance to the Department of Education is what makes the difference. The experience that we found was that the Western Cape Education Department was more than open to assist. They even agreed to put processes in place to expedite in addressing these problems, in how they can facilitate business and individuals to support the schools from a technology perspective. One of the other things that we did is conducted a full analysis of all the schools within the regions, prioritize the urgent needs and the needs versus the wants. What are the real requirements? We also reached out to various stakeholders, and we do that on a regular basis. And some of the examples is the engagement that I've had with Vodacom, MTN, Telkom, all of these big providers to engage with them and bring them on board as to how they are able to assist from a sponsorship, donation, and as I mentioned, not just donations, but also support. Then importantly is to keep an itinerary of the sponsorships that are received to make sure these can be tracked and ensure they're being used for the purpose that they're intended for. Then sharing of resources amongst schools is very important. This has to be a collaborative initiative in that resources need to be shared. And then of course, providing regular updates within the community of practice meetings that are held by Partners for Possibility. Another very exciting initiative which has really worked well within the Winelands region, which I think is really important to highlight, is the Youth at Work Partnership. The Youth at Work Partnership, or the Youth at Work organization, has actually deployed unemployed youth into the PFP schools for a 12-month internship. So what this gives or provides is the opportunity to young employed youth to gain experience and exposure and to learn under the supervision of an educator. It also prepares them for a permanent role after the internship, with some of them being able to take up permanent roles at the school, depending on whether the school can raise funds for their salaries. So earlier this year, it was quite exciting that there was 13 young people with IT qualifications that were appointed across the Winelands schools. And these young people have taken up these various roles within an IT environment at the school. And these include items such as maintenance of the IT equipment, setting up classes, lessons, facilitating Zoom meetings, and various introductions, and assisting the educators as well as the learners in adapting to this new norm where we find ourselves in this world of technology. To give an example of one of the needs analysis that was conducted by Jessica Batts in the Winelands region is a needs analysis around connectivity. And this is something, just to give an example, which is really practical. How many learners, teachers, school governing body posts do we have, and households that are impacted by the number of learners? And what Jessica managed to do in her analysis is to divide it by the Winelands groups and the number of schools, and look at the total number of learners, the total number of teachers, and the total number of school governing body posts, and the number of households that are impacted. So if you look practically at this slide that I have up at the moment, it's a total of 36,292 learners, 1,182 teachers, 179 school governing body teachers, and almost 142,000 households that are impacted. Now, what Jessica was looking at here is how do we assist, or how can we help in providing these educators and households with connectivity, because that is where it starts. Let's face it, access to e-learning starts with connectivity. How do they get connectivity? This is by means of access to the internet. So in the analysis that Jessica did was looking, I beg your pardon, at the immediate need is why don't we look at obtaining 1,409 SIM cards? This is broken up into 1,182 teachers, 179 governing body teachers, and 48 principals. The approach was, let us conduct a trial run and assist the principals and teachers by at least providing them with a SIM card. And here we can take a sample of high and primary school and have a look at how we can conduct this on a pilot or a trial run. We took the assumption they're likely to have some sort of smartphone or device that can enable them to gain access to learning material. They'll be able to download it and make it available to the learners. So if we could make a simple start by getting 320 SIM cards, that will enable the principals and a number of teachers across 48 schools. Because as I mentioned previously, we need to enable the teachers first. We need to enable the teachers to be able to teach in this new environment. And one of the key aspects is to provide connectivity. So that is just a very basic example of the type of needs analysis that can be done to understand and ascertain what the need is within our learner community and our educator community. So in closing, what can we do? What are the possibilities? And I think from the experience that we have had over the past 2 years is that I firmly believe there are indeed great possibilities where we can assist as a community, as business, as educators, as partners for possibility. We can engage with the Department of Education. I think it's clear, and my engagement I've had with the Western Cape Education Department, there is opportunity. I think it's about the way that we engage and the type of assistance that we offer. Let us engage with the providers. Let us engage with the Vodacoms, the MTNs, the Telcoms, the Cell Cs. As I've mentioned, they also have an obligation toward education within this country to provide connectivity for schools. There are other opportunities such as reverse URL billing. For those of you that don't know, this is where you can actually get sponsorship where companies or organizations will pay for the utilization to access specific educational links on the internet. And what that means is even if somebody doesn't have data, they're still able to access these educational and learning sites at no cost to them, but that cost is carried by the sponsor. And then, of course, collaboration with the private sector, collaboration around funding and resources. And again, what I found to be most valuable to schools often in these underprivileged and rural areas is not always getting computers and equipment. It's about offering help and resources. Come and set up, teach, collaborate with teachers and with students. That is what often makes the difference. So in closing, I would like to just quote a very moving statement from Jessica, who is extremely passionate. And I think it's really a wonderful statement that she made. My plea is to every source that can understand these horrific circumstances of our communities, schools, and principals, and every learner, to help us in whatever way you can afford under the circumstances. We are denying a vulnerable and hungry child the human right to quality education. Thank you.